Okay, today we're going to talk about fraction to decimal, decimal to fraction, then fraction to percent, percent to fraction, decimal to percent, and percent to decimal. If you do not have your flipbook in front of you, or markers, or a pencil or pen to take your notes, why don't you go ahead and pause me, get your materials you need, your flipbook, markers, pens, whatever, drink, snack. And don't forget, you can pause the video at any time that you need to take a break, or go back and rewind and listen over if you missed a concept. Okay, welcome back. Let's go ahead and start in the upper right-hand corner, fraction to decimal. In fraction to decimal, the rule I want you to remember is called TBO. T stands for top number in, and the B is bottom number out. And then we're going to go ahead and, as that line means in a fraction, divide for the decimal. For example, looking at our first example, 7/8. 7 divided by 8. Top number in, TBO. So 7 divided by 8. If you think you can go do this problem, go ahead and just stop me. Work the problem on your own and then play me so you can see if you actually got the problem right. So go ahead and stop. Okay, the rest of us are going to go ahead and see what this problem looks like. 8 cannot go into 7, so I have to add a decimal and a 0. Go ahead and bring my decimal straight up. It can't move anymore. 8 goes into 70 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. So I'm going to put my 64. Now I have to subtract. 0 minus 4, I can't do that, so I'm going to have to borrow. That becomes a 6, and the 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 4 has 6 left over. 6 minus 6 is 0. Well, I can't stop with 6 left over. A remainder is part of a whole. A decimal is part of a whole. I already have the remainder. I already have the decimal, the part of the whole. So I got to keep going. I got to add another 0 and bring it down. I got to keep going until it stops. Okay? So now I have 60 divided by 8. Well, I got to go one less, so 7. 7 times 8 is 56. So now I get 60 minus 56. So that means this time I have 4 left over. Again, I can't stop. So I have to add a decimal and bring it all the way down this time. So 8 goes into 40 5 times. Go ahead and put my 40 at the bottom. And finally, I have nothing left over, so I'm completely done. 7/8 is the same thing as 0.875, or 875 thousandths is the proper way to say it. Okay, our second example problem is 11/20. Now, since I don't have room right here, I'm going to write it over here to the side. Again, we're going to TBO. That means we're going to put our top number in. So this time we're going to have 11 divided by 20. And bottom number out. Top number in, bottom number out. 20 cannot go into 11. So I'm going to have to add my decimal and my 0. And again, you might have watched the first one, but if you think you can go ahead and divide this one, go ahead and stop the video and do it by yourself first, and then just turn on the video to check your work. Okay, so I'm going to put my decimal up here. Now guys, don't forget the shortcut. What's so awesome about this problem is they both end in zeros. So you can ignore the zeros and just look at how many times that 2 can go into 11. 2 can go into 11 only 5 times. So 5 probably works for both of them. Okay, so let me go back. 5 times 0 is 0, and 5 times 2 is 10. So that means I have nothing left over there. And 1 minus 0 is 1. I have 10 left over. Again, I can't stop, so I have to add a 0 and go ahead and bring it down. Now we have 100 divided by 20. Well, ignore the zeros again. You could pretend the zeros aren't there. So 2 into 10 this time is again 5. 5 times 0, because the 0 really is there. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 2 is 10. And our answer is 0.55, or 55 hundredths is the correct way to say this, our proper way to say it. Now again, guys, that was only a shortcut because both numbers, the inside and outside, ended with a 0. Those zeros are still there, but we can pretend they're not there to make it a simpler problem. It's a strategy in math. Now let's go back to our home slide and see the other side. Now that was fraction to decimal. Now let's flip open the right-hand side and look at decimal to fraction. Okay, looking at our decimal to fraction, number 1, read the decimal. Number 2, write it as a fraction. Number 3, simplify the fraction to lowest terms. In this section, you just really have to know your place values. For example, the first place right after the decimal, we have our tenths, and we have our hundredths, and then what we would have next is our thousandths. So right now, this 8 is in the hundredths place. So then that means write it as a fraction, 8 hundredths. Now, we have to simplify the fraction to lowest terms. Now, 8 and 100 are both even numbers. So one strategy is to cut them in half. Half of 8 is 4. Half of 100 is also 50. Well, if you look at those numbers, those are even again. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, they all end in a 4 or a 0. So those are even, so I can cut them in half again. Half of 4 is 2, and half of 50 is 25. 2 is even, but 25 is odd. There's nothing that can go into 2 that also goes into 25. So now we're in lowest terms, 2 25ths. Okay, guys, my last one's not showing on the slide, so I rewrote it, 0.4. But the correct way to read it is to know that place value. That 4, the 4 is sitting in the tenths place. So we write that as 4 tenths. So we write that as 4 tenths. Now, if you look at those numbers, 4 and 10, those are both even numbers, so the shortcut is to cut them in half. Half of 4 is 2, and half of 10 is 5. So that gave us 2/5. Very easily done, decimal to fraction. Good job, guys. Now let's go back to the home page and go to our middle section. Fraction to percent. If we flip over the fraction to percent, since percent means out of, yes, out of 100, make an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. The numerator of the equivalent fraction is the percent. Write the number and add the percent sign. Okay, so our first example, we have 4 25ths. Okay, number 1 says make an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. So one way we want to go about this is to change the 25. We want another fraction, although we want 100 on the bottom. Now, guys, the shortcut to 25 is like quarters. How many quarters make up a dollar? 4. So our scale factor is multiplying by 4. 25 times 4 is 100. 4 quarters make a dollar. Now, since these are equal, whatever I do to the bottom, I also have to do the same thing to the top. So not only do I want to multiply the bottom by 4, I want to multiply the top by 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. So that meant on step 2, the numerator, which is your top number, is the equivalent fraction is the percent. So in step 3, I'm just going to write the number. So what I get from my numerator? 16. So then that means I have 16%. Okay. Go down to our second example. I would like you to pause me and try the second example on your own. Okay, remember you want to set it to a denominator of 100. So you want to see how many times that 5 can go into 100. Okay, well 5 can go into 10 2 times, and you have that extra 0. So it's going to be 20 times. And whatever you do to the bottom, we're going to do the same thing to the top. So we have 3 times 20 on the top. Well, 3 times 2 is 6, and you add that 0, so we get 6. Again, for step 2, the numerator, which is your top number, is our percent. So we got 60 as our numerator, so we'd have 60%, which we need to ask ourselves, is that reasonable? Does that make sense? Well, half of 100, 50%, would be 50. 3 is more than halfway, so that does work. If we found $5 and I was splitting it with Miss Bailey down the hall, we'd each get $2.50. So that's a little bit more. 3 is a little bit more than half. Therefore, 60% is a little bit more than 50%. Now, if you notice over here in the far corner, you might highlight that with your highlighter in your flip book. Memorize the 8s. The odd 8s, if you just memorize them, is going to make your life so much easier. This is 12.5%. 3/8 is 37.5%. 5/8 62.5%. And 7/8 87.5%. Guys, you really need to have that memorized. That would really speed it up and make life a lot easier. Now let's take it back to the home slide and see where we're going next. We just finished with fraction to percent. Now let's look at percent to fraction. Since again, percent means out of 100, put the percent as a number and 100 as the denominator. Step 2, simplify the fraction to lowest terms. So if we're looking at this problem, it's 70%. So that to me means we're going to have 70%. Means out of 100. So we'll have 70 out of 100. Now step 2 says to simplify. That means put it in lowest terms. Well, we kind of lucked out here because these both end in zeros. Since they both end in zeros, we can scratch them out. And then I have 7/10. There's nothing else that can go into 7 that can also make 10. So my answer is just going to be 7/10. Okay, now let's look at our second example. 26%. That means 26 out of, again, percent means per 100, so 26 out of 100. Now these are both even numbers, so again, cut them in half. It doesn't matter if you do the top first, you do the bottom first. I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom first because half of 100 is easy. That's 50%. So that's 50. This one you might want to break it down. That's 26. Well, what's half of 20? 10. What's half of 6? 3. So if you put that together, that makes 13. 13 plus 13 is 26. Now 13 is an odd number. There's nothing that can go into 13 except for 1 times 13. And 13 cannot go into 50, so then that's my final answer. 13/50ths is it. Those are your 2 examples for percent to fraction. Now we're finally to the bottom of our flip book, starting looking at decimal to percent. The last 2 are the easiest ones, so this should go quickly. The shortcut is we're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. Percent signs go in the back. Now the kicker though is if you need to add a 0 if needed. We don't always need to. Now again, we only move 2 places. So if we look at this example, we have 1, 2. We don't care we have another number left over. It can only move 2. So our final answer is going to be 12.5. 12.5%. And the reason why is y'all told me a while ago that percent is equal to 100. Percent means per 100, for every 100. If I'm looking at that as percent means per every 100, those have 2 zeros. Zeros are what we call placeholders. So that's why we can only move it 2 places, because we only have 2 placeholders. Okay, now let's go to our second example. Try it on your own first. Stop the video and try it first. So we're going to move it 2 places. 1, 2. Now what am I going to do with that empty hole? Again, add a 0 if needed. So that means we need to fill that hole so no one falls in the hole and gets hurt. Okay, so that's an easy way to look at it. You can't have any holes. So again, this made 90% because we had to move our decimal 2 places. Okay, good job guys. Thank you for being patient. We have one last one. Percent to decimal. Now these are opposites, so what do you think we're going to do this time? Move the decimal point, what? 2 places to the left this time. You're trying to get rid of this percent sign, so you want to walk away from the percent sign, and you can only move twice. 1, 2. So our final answer is 0.37. Whoops, that shouldn't be there. 37 or 300, can't talk. 375 thousandths. We're going from percent to decimal. Now don't forget, add 0 only if needed. Now on that problem, we didn't have to add a 0. We didn't need it. We had exactly enough places. Now looking at our last example in our flip book, we have 2%. Well, there's no decimal, so the decimal should be at the back with the percent sign. I want to walk away from this percent sign. 2 places. 1, 2. So if I walked away from the percent sign, now I'm going to have point, but I have to fill that hole. You cannot leave an empty space. So that means I'm going to have to fill it with a 0. So now I'm going to have 0.02 or 2 hundredths, which makes sense if percent means per hundredths. Okay, let's go back home to the beginning of our flip book. Okay, you did a great job tonight. Thank you for working on your homework and filling out your fractions in decimal and decimal to percents. I hope this was a good review for you from the 7th grade and you're ready to move on tomorrow in class. Thank you.